before anything else, you need to understand the weight of what you're about to hear. The final recording from Evan Hale wasn't discovered on the path he entered. It wasn't even found near a trail. It was lying half-buried beside a fallen cedar, 3 miles deeper into the forest than any ranger has ever documented. The mud around it looked churned, as if something immense had moved through it recently. Something heavy, something pulled. Evan was an experienced hiker. He signed a registry. He told friends he'd return within 48 hours. When he didn't, the search team assumed the storm delayed him. But the deeper they pushed into the woods, the more it felt like the storm was circling them, as though the rain followed their steps instead of falling from the clouds. They found no broken branches, no torn clothing, no makeshift shelter, no tracks leading away from the campsite. It was as if Evan had simply walked forward and dissolved into the rain. But a single item was left behind. A small action camera, scratched to the lens, still warm to the touch, even though the rain had been falling for hours. When they played the footage back for the first time, the team expected the usual things. Wind pounding the microphone, the shuffle of boots, maybe Evan calling out. What they heard instead lasted less than 6 seconds, but it changed the entire direction of the search. The footage flickered violently, as though something enormous passed in front of the camera. The angle warped. The frame collapsed into darkness. Only the rain remained. But beneath it, beneath that steady hiss, was a voice. A voice pressed so close to the microphone that it sounded like the speaker was leaning over the device, waiting for someone to press play. It wasn't Evan's voice. It wasn't any member of the search team. And it didn't sound like someone calling for help. It sounded calm, focused, intent, almost as though whoever, or whatever, spoke those words wasn't talking to Evan at all. Some members of the team insisted the voice said their name. Others claimed it wasn't a name at all. But they all agreed on one thing. The sound didn't belong in those woods. It didn't belong anywhere. And here's the part that forced the Rangers to close the trail before sunrise. When they replayed that final second in the shelter of the outpost, the voice changed. It shifted, as if it realized someone new was listening, as if it had been waiting for the search team to hear it, the same way it waited for Evan. Listen carefully. You'll hear it soon enough. Evan Hale wasn't a thrill seeker. He wasn't reckless or unprepared or chasing some hidden valley the way amateur hikers sometimes do. He was disciplined. He was measured. He'd spent years exploring isolated trails across the state, logging weather patterns, and tracking wildlife movements with the patience of someone who respected the terrain more than he feared it. He chose Raven's Pass for one reason: the challenge. It is a remote, unforgiving trail stretching across 30 miles of dense forest, narrow ridges, and sudden drops into ravines carved by decades of storms. The path twists in strange ways, doubling back, narrowing unexpectedly, splitting into spurs that appear on no official map. Rangers maintain the entrances, the markers, the registry. But even they admit that once you're deep inside, the trail has a rhythm of its own. Raven's Pass has a reputation. Most hikers talk about the sudden weather shifts. One moment, the sky is open and clear. The next, rain crashes through the canopy, so intensely it feels like walking beneath a waterfall. But locals repeat older stories, accounts from decades ago, about travelers who claimed the forest watched them, that the trees shifted when the rain fell, that voices carried from places no person could stand. Still, Evan prepared. He mapped his route. He packed supplies for 4 days. And, as always, he carried his compact action camera and his audio recorder. Evan kept meticulous logs, his own habit, developed after witnessing a climbing accident years earlier. Every few hours, he recorded his position, weather conditions, and anything unusual he observed. The first entries were routine, descriptions of the trail, the weight of his pack, the way the forest felt alive after the morning rainfall. He noted the texture of the mud beneath his boots, the narrowness of the ridge cliffs, and the rising wind that whispered through the branches in long, trembling breaths. Everything seemed ordinary, calm, just another hike for a seasoned backpacker. But then, hours before Evan vanished, something shifted. His voice logs changed in tone. At first, barely noticeable, small hesitations, pauses where he seemed to be listening to something beyond the recorder. Then longer gaps, reports that were shorter, less confident. In one of his final entries, Evan spoke in a voice low enough that the recorder barely caught it. It wasn't the tone of a man describing the trail. It was the tone of someone trying to convince himself he was imagining what he saw. And in that fragment, he said something that froze every ranger who heard it. "I keep thinking someone's watching me from the tree line, but every time I turn, there's nothing there." That was the last clear log he recorded. Everything that followed became harder to explain. Evan's last clear log was recorded sometime in the late afternoon. The storm had just begun to gather strength, brushing through the canopy with long, sweeping waves of wind. According to the timestamp, he was somewhere near the midsection of Raven's Pass, where the trail narrows into a corridor lined with towering pines. The trunks there grow unnaturally close together, their branches intertwined so tightly that only thin slivers of light break through. In the footage, Evan lifts the camera to scan the tree line. The angle shakes slightly as he adjusts the lens. You can hear the rain tapping rhythmically against the casing. He whispers something, too soft to decipher, and then turns toward the trees. The frame freezes for a moment, distorted by a faint line of static. He lingers on the shot longer than necessary, as though waiting for something to shift, something he thought he saw before the recorder was turned on. The next moment is almost easy to overlook. A faint sound, something like a step, echoes through the forest from somewhere behind him. Evan turns sharply. The camera swings left, capturing nothing but trunks and shadow. The rain swallows the noise. But if you listen closely, right before he turns, you can hear him breathe in, fast and shallow, like a man realizing he's no longer alone. Evan tries to reassure himself. In his voice logs, he blames the sound on branches snapping beneath rainfall. He mentions that the forest feels different, but doesn't elaborate. Instead, he continues hiking, putting more distance between himself and the place where he thought he heard the step. A few minutes later, another log. He sounds more alert. His breathing is slightly louder, his voice tighter. He talks about the mud becoming slippery, about the trail markers being harder to see through the storm. But underneath all of that, beneath the practical updates, there's something else. A hesitation, a quiet strain. Evan mentions finding a boot print in the mud. At first, nothing strange about that. Plenty of hikers explore Raven's Pass in warmer months. But this print was fresh. Too fresh. The rain should have smoothed the edges, but it hadn't. The impression was clear, clean, sharp, as if someone had just stepped there moments before. He follows the print with the camera. His commentary becomes confused. You can hear him mutter something, probably disbelief, because the next detail is what rattled the rangers who reviewed the footage. The footprint matched his own boot pattern, but the direction of the print was reversed, pointing back toward the trailhead, while Evan was miles deeper into the forest. Still, he continued forward. He didn't turn back. Experienced hikers know how easily mud can deform shapes, and at that point, Evan likely believed he was overthinking, reacting to the storm, the isolation, the creeping darkness. But then came the next entry, a short one, barely 10 seconds long. The audio wavers with static before stabilizing. Evan whispers, "I heard someone say my name. Can't tell how far. Feels close, too close." He stops speaking. On the recording, there's a moment, just one, where every sound drops out. The rain, the wind, the forest. Everything goes still, like the world is holding its breath. When the background noise comes back, Evan speaks again, but his voice lowers to barely above a whisper. He says he doesn't see anyone. He says there's no sign of another hiker. And yet, the tone of his voice makes it clear he's no longer convinced he's alone. For the next several minutes of footage, Evan continues walking, turning the camera behind him more often than ahead. Every time he spins, the lens captures a stretch of forest so dense it feels like the trees are pushing closer. Nothing moves, nothing shifts, but you can sense the tension building in him. His breathing changes. His steps grow more deliberate, more cautious. The final detail from this section is subtle, but the rangers flagged it immediately. The forest sounds different. Normally, storms bring a kind of chaotic music, branches shaking, wildlife scattering, streams overflowing. But in Evan's recording, there's nothing. No animals, no rush of water, no shifting brush, only the rain. And beneath it, a faint sound that doesn't belong. A low, rhythmic pattern, almost like steps matching Evan's pace, but from somewhere just beyond the camera's reach. This was the first moment the Rangers marked as unexplainable. In the first moment, Evan truly understood that something was moving through the forest with him, something he couldn't see. The next portion of Evan's recording is difficult to categorize. It doesn't show anything unusual. There are no clear shapes, no figures darting between the trees, no strange lights. But what stands out most is the silence. For nearly 20 minutes, the only sound accompanying Evan's footsteps is the rain. No birds, no insects, nothing that belongs in a living forest. That kind of quiet is rare, even during heavy storms. Rangers who reviewed the footage said it reminded them of the stillness that occurs right before a lightning strike. Except this lasted far too long. Evan pauses at the edge of a narrow clearing. The grass is high, swaying under the storm, and the soil is marked with deep, uneven impressions, far too wide to be boot prints. The mud appears pushed aside, as though something heavy traveled across it recently, dragging weight with it. He crouches, brushing his hand along one of the impressions. His breathing becomes louder, faster. His voice log picks up a faint murmur. Evan trying to identify the shape, but the mud doesn't give away a clear form. It doesn't resemble a paw or a hoof or anything he can match to the local wildlife. In the video, he looks over his shoulder, slowly, as though he's expecting to find someone standing behind him. The camera catches the tree line, shivering under the storm. Every trunk is dark, slick with rain, and packed so tightly together they create a wall of shadow. Then, for just 1 second, the audio shifts. A faint, irregular pattern rises beneath the rainfall. Hard to identify, harder to ignore. It almost resembles breathing, slow, drawn out, as if whatever is producing the sound is fighting against the storm's weight. Evan freezes. He raises the camera and sweeps across the clearing. Nothing. No movement. No shape. But the breathing continues, so faint it sounds misplaced, like someone whispering through a cracked door. He whispers into the recorder. There's something across the clearing. I can hear it, but I can't see it. He steps backward, carefully, planting each foot as quietly as he can manage. The camera shakes slightly. His breathing grows sharper. He doesn't dare turn his back to the clearing. Instead, he retreats toward the thicker section of trees where the trail narrows. Just as he reaches the opposite side of the clearing, the breathing stops. Completely. The sudden quiet hits the recording with an eerie weight, like the moment a room empties of air. That's when the sound begins. At first, Evan believes it's dripping water, but the taps come in pairs. 2 quick beats, a pause, 2 more. Not random. Intentional. Like someone testing the ground with deliberate steps. The direction of the sound changes. It moves through the clearing. Slow. Steady. Crossing left to right, just beyond the limit of the camera's visibility. Evan tries to follow it. The camera tilts, searching the far side of the tree line. The trees sway under the storm, but the pattern persists, steps pressing through wet earth, matching his movement. Then the sound stops, directly in front of him. Evan holds his breath. The footage is still. The rain seems to hesitate. The clearing sits motionless, waiting. And then something shifts behind him. He spins, nearly dropping the camera. The screen jerks violently. The lens captures a flash of movement along the tree line, a darker shape within the darkness, pulling away into the forest with a gliding motion far too smooth to be a person moving through dense underbrush. He whispers again, barely audible. It knows I'm here. Evan begins walking faster now. His breathing is uneven. Every few seconds, he lifts the camera over his shoulder. The footage shakes with each hurried step. The forest grows darker as he pushes deeper, branches closing overhead, shadows clinging to the spaces between trees. What happens next is one of the moments investigators replayed dozens of times. The camera picks up a faint reflection, 2 pale shapes between the trees. At first, they look like droplets catching light. But as Evan turns, the shapes move. They glide between branches, maintaining distance, watching, following his pace with uncanny precision. Evan doesn't describe what he sees. He doesn't say anything at all, but the image is unmistakable. Too dim, motionless points hovering in the shadows, almost level with his own height. And then, just as quickly as they appear, they vanish. But the footsteps return, this time closer, this time matching the rhythm of Evan's own, like an echo with intent. From this moment on, Evan stops using the recorder for updates. The recordings shift from calm documentation to breathing, to hurried footsteps, to the sound of someone fighting exhaustion and dread. His voice only returns once, a strained whisper barely loud enough for the microphone to catch. It's following me. He doesn't say what it is. He doesn't try to describe it. But the way his voice cracks at the edges tells us everything. And this is where the story begins to break away from anything the Rangers had prepared for. Because the next time Evan speaks, the storm around him reacts. As Evan pressed deeper into the forest, the trail began to betray him. What had been a narrow, if treacherous, path gradually dissolved into something unrecognizable. The dirt gave way to roots so tangled they twisted like veins under the rain. Branches reached down low, scraping the camera lens, as though the forest itself were trying to keep him on the path. But the path was no longer the path. He stumbled upon a section of the trail that should have been impossible. Maps and satellite images clearly mark Raven's Pass, yet the camera shows a split in the trail that doesn't exist anywhere else. Two narrow corridors of mud and roots, one leading further into darkness, the other seeming to fold back upon itself. Evan hesitated. He crouched, moving the camera to inspect the ground. There are no footprints, no human tracks of any kind, only the faint impressions of something massive, dragging itself along the earth. The forest around him seemed denser here, unnatural. The rainfall poured over the trees, yet the air was oddly still at ground level. He moved forward cautiously, every step measured, every sound amplified through the microphone. And then, a sound emerged from the shadows. Something soft, wet, deliberate. Something crawling through the mud ahead. Evan froze. The camera wobbled as he slowly turned his head. In the dim light filtered through the rain-soaked canopy, he thought he saw shapes, dark shapes between the trunks, moving slowly, gliding, as if suspended above the wet earth. Shapes that mirrored his own movements. Shapes that didn't belong to the forest. He whispered into the recorder, "This isn't part of the trail. I don't know where it leads, but it's following me." The trail twisted impossibly. For every step forward, he felt as though the forest itself had rearranged. The trees closed in behind him. Roots snaked across the mud where there had been none moments before. Even the rain seemed to shift, pattering over areas that should have been dry. Evan's breaths came fast now, visible in the cold air, each exhale short and sharp against the oppressive silence. Then the forest revealed something more disturbing. The trail, which had been visible through the rain, became impossible to follow. Every marker he relied on disappeared. Familiar bends twisted into new angles. Rocks and roots were out of place. And somewhere, just beyond his vision, the faint echoes of footsteps matched his own, perfectly synchronized. He lifted the camera and scanned the area. The lens captures movement at the edge of vision, shadows stretching, coalescing, and retreating in ways that no human body could replicate. He whispers again, barely audible. It's not hiding, it's waiting. Evan decided to push on. Logic, experience, the instinct to survive, all guiding him. But the forest seemed to resist. Each step forward brought new obstructions. Fallen trees placed oddly across the path. Mud slicker than it should be. Roots tangled to trip him, as though someone, or something, knew exactly how he moved. And then, something changed in the soundscape. The rain didn't stop, but it no longer masked the faint whispers that floated through the trees. The whispers were irregular, fragmented, phrases too brief to fully comprehend. The words repeated patterns, like a language he almost recognized, yet couldn't process. Each fragment seemed to respond to his movements, to his breathing, as if the forest were alive and conversing with him. He stopped walking. The camera swings slowly to the left and right. Nothing. Only rain and shadows. And yet, the feeling of being watched intensified. The rhythm of footsteps, whispers, and shifting branches all converged in the forest around him, pressing closer than any human or animal could. And then Evan noticed the anomaly that would haunt investigators for years. A series of markings along the tree trunks, symbols he didn't recognize, scratched into the bark in long, deliberate lines. They were too precise for a hiker or animal, too purposeful, and they seemed to pulse faintly in the camera's night-adjusted lens, like they had been waiting for him to arrive. He recorded one final whisper into the device before nightfall. "I don't know how to leave, and it knows I can't." This was the point when Evan's footage became fragmented. Hours of recording were later recovered in pieces, corrupted and distorted. Yet each fragment confirms that the forest, Raven's Pass, was no longer a trail. It had become something else. A maze. A living, sentient entity following, guiding, and waiting for him. And somewhere beyond the next bend, the thing watching Evan made itself impossible to ignore. By the time night began to settle over Raven's Pass, Evan's awareness of the forest had changed entirely. He was no longer hiking a path. He was navigating a living labyrinth. Every step brought uncertainty. Every rustle of leaves, every drip of rain, every snapping branch demanded vigilance. And the presence behind him, just beyond the edges of his vision, had grown bolder. He paused again, raising the camera in a slow, deliberate sweep. The lens captured a stretch of the trail that should have ended in a sharp bend, yet instead opened into a narrow clearing surrounded by jagged, wet rocks. And there, just beyond the faint reach of his flashlight, he saw it. At first, it was only a shadow, a shape that seemed taller than a man, with limbs that bent at angles that should have been impossible. Its presence was almost abstract at first, less a form and more a distortion in the space between the trees, a ripple in the air that absorbed light and sound. Evan froze. Every instinct screamed to retreat, but curiosity, or perhaps disbelief, kept him from running. The creature didn't move at first. It simply observed. Its outline shifted slowly, like smoke caught in the wind. Evan whispered into the recorder, voice trembling but controlled. "It's tall, bigger than any man. I can't." It's like the shadows themselves are standing. The closer he aimed the light, the more the figure seemed to recede. It was as if it wasn't bound by the trail or gravity. Its movement wasn't walking. It was gliding, or perhaps flowing, over the uneven terrain. And yet, every time Evan shifted his position, the figure repositioned itself, always maintaining a distance, always watching. And then the first contact happened, a sound not of this world, a low, almost guttural whisper that emanated from everywhere and nowhere at once. Evan's breath caught. He swung the camera around, trying to locate the source. Nothing moved, and yet, the whispers were speaking to him. Not words he could understand, but tones that conveyed intent, malice, awareness, recognition. Evan's next log is fragmented. Static runs across the recording. Through the distortion, you can make out a whispered phrase, repeated 3 times, barely audible. "You shouldn't have come." Then movement. Faster. The shadow leapt, or glided, closer. The forest seemed to bend around it. Mud splashing, leaves snapping. Evan's footsteps sped, but the trail was treacherous. Roots snagged his boots, and the slick mud threatened to send him tumbling. Behind him, the rhythm of movement mirrored his own, as if the creature was matching him step for step. At one point, he turned sharply, catching a glimpse. Eyes, if you could call them that, glinting, reflecting faint light like wet stones. Not human. Too high, too wide. And then, in a moment that made even the most seasoned investigator shiver, it opened its mouth, if it had one, and emitted a sound that wasn't quite a growl, not quite a scream. Something primal, something older than the forest itself. Evan stumbles. The camera tilts. For a heartbeat. The lens captures the shape completely. Elongated limbs, jagged angles, a body that seems almost fluid, moving in ways impossible to mimic. And then, it's gone, just as quickly as it appeared, vanished into the darkness, leaving only the sound of the rain and the echo of its presence in the air. And this is where the first major mini cliffhanger occurs. The footage shows Evan slowing down, pausing to catch his breath. He mutters to himself, voice trembling. "It's here. It's watching me. I can feel it breathing." Investigators later noted that the rhythm of his steps and the rhythm of the creature's presence are perfectly synchronized from this point forward. It is always there, always following, never ahead, never behind, just present, waiting. And then, just when Evan thinks he might escape into a safer section of the trail, something happens that shifts the tension entirely. The path ahead curves unexpectedly, revealing a tree, twisted unnaturally, directly in his path. The bark is scarred with symbols like the ones he saw earlier, but larger, fresher, and at the base of the tree, imprints in the mud, multiple sets of feet, but none human. Wide, elongated, deep enough to sink through the wet soil, arranged in a pattern deliberate, like the forest itself has marked its territory. He freezes, camera shaking. The whispers swell faintly, indistinct but insistent. And then, something touches him. Not a hand, not claws, something brushing against the back of his neck. The sensation is enough to make him stumble forward, nearly losing the camera. This is where the recordings abruptly cut off for several minutes, leaving nothing but static and rain. It is the moment investigators believe Evan first came face to face with the entity, close enough to sense it, far enough to survive, if only barely. Every detail after this point increases the intensity, driving toward the mid-video twist. After the pause in the recordings, Evan's footage resumes abruptly. He's no longer on a path that resembles the trail he entered hours earlier. The forest has become a maze of slick roots and twisted trees, branches close overhead, forming near solid walls. Every sound, his breathing, the shifting mud underfoot, the faint snap of distant branches, is amplified against the oppressive quiet. The first thing he notices is the pattern of the forest itself. Every step forward feels unnatural. He stumbles, almost falls, and as he rights himself, the camera catches it. A shadow that moves independently of the others, smaller at first, then growing taller with every second. Not ahead, not behind beside him, matching his pace exactly. He whispers into the recorder, "It's learning me, tracking me." The twist becomes clear in the footage a few minutes later. Evan rounds a bend and finds a clearing unlike anything on the trail map. Sunken earth forms a shallow pit, surrounded by trees carved with symbols he has seen before. But here, the mud contains footprints. Not just one or two, but dozens. Wide, long, and perfectly aligned in unnatural symmetry, leading toward him from multiple directions. And then he realizes these prints are moving, slightly, shifting, sinking deeper, as if something alive is arranging them. This is when Evan's recordings show the first direct confrontation. The shadow stretches fully into the clearing, taller than any man, limbs bent at impossible angles. But then, it changes. Its shape shifts suddenly, fluidly, like smoke condensing into something recognizable. And in a moment that sent investigators scrambling to analyze every frame, the figure takes a human-like form. Evan himself. Yes, the entity mirrors him. Every movement, every step, every twitch of his head, it copies him perfectly. It is no longer separate. It has learned, and it doesn't just watch. It waits for him to react, testing, probing, and preparing. Evan stumbles backward, voice shaking. It's me. Or it wants to be. The forest itself reacts. Branches shift, forming walls and corridors that weren't there moments before. The rain intensifies as if punctuating the revelation. Evan tries to move, but the clearing has become a cage. Every possible exit blocked. And in that instant, the recordings capture the sound that terrified investigators most. The sound of multiple footsteps echoing around him, but each one perfectly mimicking his own rhythm. And then the entity takes the next step forward. Not slowly, not hesitantly. It moves deliberately, gliding across the mud, its mirrored form indistinguishable from Evan at a glance. Only the eyes, black, reflective, empty, give it away. Investigators noted the exact moment when Evan realizes he is no longer the hunter, but the hunted, and that whatever follows him has already predicted every possible escape. He whispers into the recorder one final time before the next fragment of footage breaks apart. I can't outrun it. It's inside the forest, and it's inside me. This mid-video revelation, the forest shifting, the entity mirroring Evan, transforms everything. The narrative up to this point, the suspense, the dread, all escalates. Viewers are left on the edge of their seats, wondering what is real, what is human, and what lurks in the shadows just beyond sight. And it sets the stage for the final confrontation, the moment when Evan comes face to face with the entity in the forest's deepest, most terrifying core. The final fragments of Evan's recordings are the most disturbing. The trail is no longer a trail. The forest has become a distorted cage, closing in from all directions. Every step is met with resistance. Roots that twist like fingers, branches that swipe at his face, mud that seems to grip his boots like a living thing. He enters a small clearing where the symbols on the trees are larger, fresher, almost glowing under the storm's dim light. Here, the entity finally reveals itself fully. Its mirrored form of Evan stand at the center, perfectly replicating his posture, every movement identical. Yet the eyes, dark, reflective, endless, hold something alien, something ancient. It watches, assessing, learning, anticipating. For a long moment, Evan doesn't move. He whispers into the recorder, "It's me, and it's not me. I don't know which is worse." The entity takes a deliberate step toward him. The mud compresses under its weight, but makes no sound. The forest itself seems to pulse in response, the rain falling in uneven, heavier patterns. And then, the first touch, not a hand, not claws, but a cold sensation across Evan's shoulder, like the forest itself reaching inside him. His breath catches, his knees buckle, and then the revelation. The forest isn't merely home to this thing. It created it. It has shaped, mirrored, and drawn Evan. Every movement he's made, every sound he's uttered, has been anticipated. And now, the creature is no longer separate. It's inside the forest, inside the storm, inside him. The camera wobbles. Evan stumbles back. His voice, faint and broken, records what may be his final words. If you're watching, it's not just here. It's waiting for you too. The footage ends abruptly. Static dominates the screen. Investigators, listening to the recordings later, reported hearing faint whispers layered beneath the rain, words in no language they recognized, yet carrying unmistakable intent. The sound of footsteps, Evan's footsteps, continued even when the camera was off. And sometimes, in the long playback, the pattern of the forest itself could be heard. Branches shifting, leaves brushing, mud squelching, as if the trail were alive and recording everything forever. What happened to Evan Hale? No one knows. The trail remains, marked on maps, but altered. Hikers who enter Raven's Pass report strange echoes, fleeting shadows, the feeling of being followed, footsteps synchronized with their own. And every so often, a camera left behind by a hiker will capture something horrifying, unexplainable. Something that waits in the rain, beyond the trail, beyond the forest, beyond reason. If you felt the rain on your skin while watching this, don't go back into the woods alone. And remember, sometimes the forest isn't just around you, it's inside you too. Comment below if you've ever felt something moving just behind you, and keep your flashlight close tonight. Do not forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this, and share this horror stories to your friends. Let's see how scared they can be.